Last week we had some teachings by a visiting teacher, Geshe Yeshi Lundrup. I think it was his first time here and the first time most of us were meeting him. And the teachings were very interesting, very lively. He was talking about the first couple of verses of a very important text, which is called the Madhyamika Vatara, or Entering the Middle Way by Chandrakirti, a great Indian master of the past. And this is one of the texts that are studied in the monasteries. The monks and nuns study this text usually for about 4 years. And it's mainly about emptiness. So this is the text that is used to understand the Madhyamika view of emptiness. It's quite tough. It's a very tough text. But the first couple of verses are really beautiful because the author, Chandrakirti, is paying homage to compassion, great compassion, and talking about the importance of compassion. And so it's very inspiring right at the beginning of the text. And for those who weren't here, I'll just briefly summarize. There are 3 types of compassion mentioned. And these are not invented by Chandrakirti. They are in the Buddhist teachings. And the 3 types of compassion are the first is called mere compassion. And this is seeing sentient beings, seeing that they are suffering, feeling moved by that, wishing them to be free of suffering, wishing to help them be free of suffering. And so that's the meaning of mere compassion. And it isn't directed at just a small number of sentient beings, like our family and friends and people around us, but all living beings. So it's really great compassion. And it is able to recognize all different kinds of suffering, not just obvious suffering, like sickness and depression and so forth, but even the deepest level of suffering, what's called pervasive compounded suffering, just the fact that our mind isn't free of disturbing emotions, ignorance, and karma. And those keep us circling in samsara again and again and again, being born again and again, experiencing suffering again and again. So one has that understanding that that kind of suffering exists for all of us, for all living beings, and really wants to free all beings from that suffering. So even though it's called mere compassion, it's actually great. It's great compassion. But the reason it's called mere compassion is because it isn't conjoined with or influenced by realizations of impermanence or emptiness. And those are there in the second and third types of compassion. So the second type of compassion is called compassion observing phenomena. But what it really means is it's just like the first kind of compassion, except it is influenced by the understanding of impermanence, realization of impermanence. So you actually realize sentient beings are changing every moment. There's no permanent sentient being. Our bodies, our minds, everything about us is changing every moment. So we're not at all fixed and permanent as we appear to be. So the person who has this type of compassion has realized subtle impermanence, and that flavors or influences their compassion. So when they're looking at sentient beings, seeing their suffering, wishing them to be free of suffering, they have that understanding of the impermanent nature of sentient beings. And the third type of compassion is called compassion of the unobservable, or without focus. There's different ways of, it's difficult to translate, but what it means is it's, again, the same type of compassion as the previous 2, except it's also influenced by the wisdom understanding emptiness, realizing emptiness. So that means you see sentient beings as empty of inherent existence. There's no inherently existing or objectively existing sentient being to be found anywhere in all the parts of the body and the mind. That we're just this mass of physical and mental components that are just labeled person or man or woman or animal or whatever, or whatever our names are. Nothing there is objectively, inherently, independently existing. So someone who has that realization, a realization of emptiness, when they're looking at sentient beings, seeing the suffering, wishing them to be free of suffering, it's flavored by or influenced by that wisdom realizing emptiness. So these three different levels of compassion develop gradually as one progresses on the path and gains these higher realizations. So that's basically what we were looking at. But then he was also bringing in lots of points that the monks and nuns, when they're studying, they debate about. Like, how does this actually work in the mind? What's the mechanism of having these different compassions in the mind, especially the last two, how do those two realizations work together? Compassion and the wisdom realizing impermanence or emptiness, how do they actually interact? So we kind of got into a lot of complicated details about that. But you have to remember, not going too far in that direction, but remembering the real point is compassion, having this really beautiful, wonderful heart of compassion. And then yesterday, I just started thinking about a class that I attended probably about 9 or 10 years ago. I was living in Italy and following the master's program. And we actually studied this text that Geshe-la was teaching from the Madhyamika Avatar. We spent 2 years studying it. And our teacher was Khensur Jamba Tekchok, who's been here a couple of times, so some of you probably met him. Wonderful teacher. And it was kind of his swan song, because he was about 80, 81, 82 at that time. And after finishing that teaching, he didn't teach anymore. He went back to his monastery and then passed away a few years later. So that was his final teaching. And I feel really fortunate that I was able to be there for that and also studying such an important text. Anyway, one day at the beginning of class, he threw out this question to us. The question was, why does the Buddha have compassion for all sentient beings? And it was kind of a simple question. But whatever people said, different students in class were giving answers. He wasn't satisfied with any of the answers that people gave. People were giving all the usual textbook answers, whatever we could think of. We were throwing out answers, but he wasn't satisfied. Finally, after we ran out of things to say, he gave the answer that he was looking for. He said, it's because the Buddha can see directly how every sentient being has been kind to him. And it was something I had never heard before. I mean, we are taught to meditate on the kindness of others, how every sentient being has been our mother and our father, and they've provided us with food and clothes and all our happiness and so on from beginningless time. So we meditate on that to help us generate compassion and love and bodhicitta. But I just never thought about it or heard about it, that, in the mind of a Buddha, the Buddha can actually see that directly, because we say a Buddha sees everything, remembers everything, all his past lives, every single relationship he's ever had, every single interaction he has ever had with every sentient being. He sees all of that directly, every single moment. So I was thinking about how extraordinary that would be, Because I don't know about you, but in my case, I don't remember all the kindness. I have to make effort to remember all the things people have done, unless it was just in the last 5 minutes, But we've received so much kindness just in this lifetime from people. But do we really have that in mind all the time? I know I don't. And sometimes I only think about the bad things they've done, forget about the kindness, all the nasty things they've done. So I really have to make effort to think of their kindness. I mean, of course, when you do think of that, it really changes your mind. It really opens your heart. But to have that there all the time, every minute, every second, and that means the Buddha, I guess, this is how I'm thinking of it, the Buddha can see each and every one of us and can see, oh, I have been his mother and his father. And, I brought him into the world when he was a little baby and fed him and took care of him and so on and so forth. Each and every one of us has done that. So much kindness, so much help we have given to him. But he can see that directly, remember that directly, every single minute, every second. And that is why, this is what he was saying, as I understood it, that is why the Buddha feels this compassion for us. So I just found that really extraordinary, really powerful. That was one of the most memorable teachings I ever had. Yeah, it just came up in my mind yesterday, and then I thought I wanted to share that because he's already passed away, and you weren't there, you weren't able to hear that teaching. But since it was related to what we were talking about last week, and also to what Venerable Children was talking about yesterday, how everyone's been our mother and kind. So it's such a beautiful, such a powerful contemplation. And this is just like a new twist on that. And I mean, this isn't something that will just suddenly arise when you're a Buddha, but I think it already starts when you're a bodhisattva, because as you're progressing on the bodhisattva path, of course you're meditating on this, you're meditating on the kindness of others, but then as your mind gets more and more developed, you gain concentration, you gain the super knowledges, then your mind starts opening up and you start having more and more memories of this life, past lives, and so on, and seeing all these things that you've experienced and all the things people have done for you and so on. So I think it's something that would also develop along the way, even before Buddhahood. But then by the time you're Buddha, it's like totally open, totally no obstacles, every single thing that everybody has ever done for you. And so, yeah, it was just really extraordinary to think of that. So I hope you find that inspiring as well. Thank you.